I never thought my HOA would become my biggest customer. But that's exactly what happened when Hurricane Marcus decided to make landfall in Pensacola, Florida, and everyone suddenly needed what they'd forced me to hide away 6 months earlier. My name is Xavier, and I own a small construction supply business that I run from my home in the Pleasant Shores community, a modest neighborhood of about 200 homes nestled between the main highway and the coastline. When I bought my house 3 years ago, the HOA rules seemed reasonable enough. Keep your lawn maintained, no loud parties after 10, paint your house in approved colors. Standard stuff. What I didn't realize was that the HOA board would change hands a year later, and with it, everything I thought I understood about living here. The trouble started on a humid Tuesday morning in March when I was unloading a shipment of weatherproof storage containers I'd ordered for my business. These weren't your average plastic bins. They were industrial-grade, reinforced steel containers, each about 8 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 4 feet tall. Perfect for storing construction materials, tools, and equipment that my clients needed for their projects. I had plans to keep 6 of them on my property, tucked neatly behind my fence where they'd be barely visible from the street. I was guiding the delivery truck driver as he carefully positioned the first container when a silver Mercedes SUV pulled up to my driveway with the kind of aggressive urgency that told me I was about to have a very unpleasant conversation. Out stepped Patricia Montgomery, the newly elected HOA president. She was exactly what you'd picture when someone says, HOA Karen. Mid-40s, blonde highlights that looked expensive but somehow cheap at the same time. Yoga pants despite clearly never doing yoga, and that particular facial expression that suggested she'd been born clutching a copy of the community bylaws. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" I wiped the sweat from my forehead and walked over to greet her, extending my hand. She looked at it like I was offering her a dead fish. "Morning, Patricia. Just getting some equipment delivered for my business. These storage containers are going to make operations a lot smoother." Her eyes narrowed as she pulled out her phone, already tapping away. Section 12. Subsection 4 of the Pleasant Shores Community Guidelines explicitly prohibits commercial equipment storage on residential properties. "I run a home-based business," I explained, keeping my tone friendly. "The containers will be behind my fence. You won't even see them from the street." "That's not the point, Jason. Rules are rules. We can't have this neighborhood turning into some kind of industrial warehouse district. Do you know what this does to property values?" I took a deep breath. My property values argument was simple. My business brought in contractors who admired the neighborhood and often recommended it to their clients looking to buy. But I could already tell Patricia wasn't interested in logic. "How about I show you exactly where they'll be positioned? I think once you see that they're not visible and they're properly secured, you'll understand this isn't an issue." She crossed her arms. "I don't need to see anything. I'm issuing you a notice of violation. You have 48 hours to remove these containers or face daily fines of $100. The delivery driver, a weathered guy named Carlos who I'd worked with for years, gave me a sympathetic look. "Boss, where do you want this one?" I was torn. If I sent them back, I'd lose the delivery fee and still need storage solutions. If I kept them and fought Patricia, I'd be in for a long battle. "Put them in the backyard as planned," I told Carlos. Then I turned to Patricia. "I'll be contesting this violation. My business license is legitimate, and I've checked the county ordinances. Home-based businesses are permitted as long as they don't create excessive traffic or noise." Patricia's face flushed red. The HOA supersedes county ordinances on aesthetic matters. You'll be hearing from our lawyer." She stormed back to her Mercedes and peeled out of my driveway, leaving rubber marks that would have definitely violated some HOA rule if she weren't the president. Over the next week, I received 3 certified letters from the HOA's attorney, a guy named Richard Pemberton, who apparently specialized in making people's lives miserable over minor infractions. Each letter threatened escalating fines and potential liens on my property if I didn't remove the containers immediately. I hired my own lawyer, Sarah Chen, who had a reputation for fighting HOA overreach. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had actually dealt with Patricia Montgomery in another case the previous year. "The thing about Patricia," Sarah explained during our first meeting, "is that she's absolutely convinced she's protecting the neighborhood from chaos. In her mind, if she lets you have storage containers, next someone will want to park an RV, then someone will paint their house neon green, and suddenly Pleasant Shores becomes a lawless wasteland." "That's quite the slippery slope," I said. "Indeed. But here's what we're dealing with. The HOA bylaws do mention commercial equipment, but they're vague. We can argue that storage containers used for a home-based business fall into a gray area. The challenge is that fighting this could take months and cost thousands in legal fees." I thought about my options. My business was doing well enough that I could afford to fight, but was it worth the stress? Then again, if I backed down now, Patricia would walk all over me for every little thing going forward. Let's fight it, I decided, but I also need a backup plan. That's when I got creative. I called my brother-in-law, Marcus, who owned a small farm about 20 miles outside of Pensacola. He had plenty of space and agreed to let me store the containers on his property temporarily while the legal battle played out. It wasn't ideal. I'd have to drive back and forth to access supplies, but it would get Patricia off my back while Sarah worked on the case. The following Monday, I arranged for the containers to be moved to Marcus's farm. I made sure to document everything with photos and videos, showing that I was complying with the HOA's demands while preserving my right to challenge their interpretation of the rules. Patricia, predictably, showed up to watch the containers being loaded onto a flatbed truck. "I'm glad you've come to your senses," she said, that smug satisfaction dripping from every word. "I'm following the notice while my attorney prepares our case," I replied evenly. "This isn't over, Patricia. We'll see about that." For the next 3 months, Sarah and I built our case. We compiled evidence showing that other homeowners in Pleasant Shores ran home-based businesses with equipment stored on their properties. There was Tom Harrison on Magnolia Street, who ran a landscaping company and had trailers parked beside his house. Jennifer Kowalski on Oak Avenue operated a mobile pet grooming business with a fully equipped van that was essentially a commercial vehicle. "The selective enforcement angle is our strongest argument," Sarah explained. "If the HOA allows some commercial equipment, but not yours, we can demonstrate bias or at least inconsistent application of the rules." We filed a formal complaint with the HOA board and requested a hearing. The bylaws required them to grant us one within 30 days. Patricia tried to delay it twice, but Sarah was relentless, threatening to take the matter to county court if they didn't follow their own procedures. The hearing was scheduled for June 15th at the community center, and I prepared like I was defending a dissertation. I had photos, property surveys, county business licenses, testimonials from neighbors who supported my business, and a detailed analysis of how my storage containers actually increased property values by allowing me to keep my garage and yard clutter-free. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept running through arguments in my head, anticipating every objection Patricia might raise. The community center was packed when I arrived. Word had spread about the hearing, and apparently this was prime entertainment for Pleasant Shores residents. Some were there to support me, others just wanted to watch the drama unfold. The HOA board sat at a long table at the front, Patricia in the center, flanked by 4 other board members. There was Donald Reeves, a retired accountant who seemed perpetually confused about why he was there. Margaret Flynn, a widow in her 70s who actually seemed reasonable. Kevin Shaw, a real estate agent who always sided with Patricia because he thought it would help his business. And finally, Linda Ortiz, a nurse who worked night shifts and looked exhausted. Patricia called the meeting to order with the kind of theatrical authority that suggested she'd been practicing with a gavel in front of her mirror. We're here to address the violation issued to Jason Xavier regarding unauthorized commercial equipment storage. Mr. Xavier, you have 15 minutes to present your case. Sarah stood up first. Before we begin, I'd like to note for the record that this hearing was delayed twice by the board, which violates the bylaw's requirement for timely response to homeowner complaints. Additionally, we've documented several instances of selective enforcement that call into question the validity of this violation. Patricia's jaw tightened. The board has the discretion to manage its schedule. Please proceed with your presentation. I stood up and walked to the front, setting up my laptop to display the photos and documents I'd prepared. My hands were steadier than I expected. Good evening, everyone. I've lived in Pleasant Shores for 3 years. I pay my dues on time, I maintain my property, and I contribute to this community. My storage containers were purchased to support my legitimate, licensed home-based business. They were positioned behind my fence, completely out of view from the street, and they posed no safety or aesthetic concerns. I clicked through the photos showing the containers' original placement. You literally couldn't see them unless you were standing in my backyard. Now, let me show you some other properties in our neighborhood. I pulled up the images of Tom's landscaping trailers, Jennifer's pet grooming van, and even caught a few shots of Kevin Shaw's real estate signs that he stored on the side of his house, which technically violated the same commercial equipment clause. The HOA bylaws state that commercial equipment storage is prohibited, but what exactly constitutes commercial equipment? A work van, a computer for a home office, tools. The language is vague and, more importantly, it's been enforced inconsistently. Margaret Flynn leaned forward, interested. Even Donald seemed to be paying attention. I'm not asking for special treatment, I continued. I'm asking for fair treatment. If the HOA wants to ban all commercial equipment, fine. Create a clear policy and apply it equally to everyone. But you can't single me out because my equipment looks different from everyone else's. Patricia interrupted, her voice tight with irritation. The difference, Mr. Xavier, is that your containers are industrial storage units. They're an eyesore and they don't belong in a residential neighborhood. They were behind my fence, I repeated. No one could see them. And if we're talking about eyesores, should we discuss the 6-foot-tall inflatable Santa that Mr. Reeves keeps up until March every year? The room erupted in laughter. Even Donald cracked a smile, though Patricia shot him a look that could have melted steel. Sarah took over. The bottom line is this. The violation was issued without clear justification. The bylaws are ambiguously worded, and the enforcement has been selective. We're requesting that the board rescind the violation and allow Mr. Xavier to return his storage containers to his property. The board members huddled together, whispering. Patricia was clearly arguing with Margaret, while Kevin nodded along with whatever Patricia said. Linda looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. After about 10 minutes, Patricia straightened up and addressed the room. The board has deliberated. While we acknowledge some of the points raised by Mr. Xavier and his attorney, we ultimately find that the storage containers in question do constitute commercial equipment that exceeds the reasonable scope of home-based business operations. The violation stands. However, we're reducing the daily fine to $50 as a gesture of goodwill. My heart sank. Sarah put a hand on my shoulder. "We'll appeal this," she whispered. "Don't worry," but I was worried. Fighting this through the courts could take a year or more, and even reduced, the fines would add up quickly if they actually tried to enforce them. The meeting adjourned, and as people filed out, several neighbors approached me to express their support. Tom Harrison, the landscaper, shook my hand. "This is garbage, man. Patricia's on a power trip. If they come after you, they'll come after all of us eventually." He wasn't wrong. Over the next few weeks, I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Patricia had started cracking down on other minor violations. Lawn height measurements, paint color disputes, even the types of mailboxes people had. She was turning Pleasant Shores into her personal fiefdom. I kept the containers at Marcus's farm and adjusted my business operations. It was inconvenient, but manageable. Sarah filed an appeal with the county, arguing that the HOA was exceeding its authority. These things moved slowly, though, and we were looking at months before any resolution. Then August arrived, and with it, hurricane season. Florida residents know the drill. You watch the weather reports, track the storms forming in the Atlantic, and hope they veer away or fizzle out before making landfall. Most years, we get lucky. Some years, we don't. Hurricane Marcus formed off the coast of Africa and started churning across the Atlantic with alarming speed and intensity. By the time it crossed into the Caribbean, it had strengthened to a Category 4. Weather models showed it heading straight for the Gulf Coast, with Pensacola directly in its path. The predictions came 10 days out. By 7 days out, the entire city was in preparation mode. By 5 days out, mandatory evacuations were issued for coastal areas. Pleasant Shores, being close to the coast, fell under the evacuation zone. Most residents started preparing to leave, boarding up windows, securing outdoor furniture, and packing essential documents and valuables. I had my own preparations to handle. My business inventory included thousands of dollars in equipment and materials that needed to be protected. The storage containers at Marcus's farm were secure, but I had supplies in my garage and shed that were vulnerable. That's when my phone rang. It was Patricia. "Jason, I need to discuss something with you urgently." Her tone was different, less aggressive, almost nervous. "What's up, Patricia? I understand you have those storage containers, the industrial ones you were keeping before." I leaned back in my chair, curious where this was going. "They're at a secure location, yes. The HOA needs to rent storage space. With the hurricane coming, we have community equipment, the lawn mowers, the pool maintenance supplies, the holiday decorations, everything that's currently in our small shed near the community center. That shed won't survive a Category 4 hurricane. We need somewhere safe to store everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The same woman who'd threatened me with fines and liens now needed my help. "You want to rent my storage containers, the ones you forced me to remove?" There was a pause. "This is an emergency situation, Jason. I'm willing to pay market rate for temporary storage. Market rate for industrial storage containers during a hurricane emergency." I did some quick mental math. That's about $500 per container per week. Given the circumstances, I'd need payment upfront for a minimum of 4 weeks. $500. Her voice rose. That's highway robbery. That's supply and demand, Patricia. Every storage facility within 50 miles is completely booked. I checked this morning. My containers are some of the only available storage space left in the area. You're welcome to look elsewhere, but given that the hurricane's hitting in 5 days, I'd say you're running out of time. I could hear her breathing hard on the other end. She was trapped and she knew it. How many containers do you have available? 6. But I'll need 3 for my own business equipment. That leaves 3 for rent. We'll take them, all 3. That's $1,500 per week, $6,000 total for 4 weeks, payable in advance. Fine. I'll have the HOA treasurer cut you a check today. Actually, given the emergency nature and the fact that banks might be closed soon, I'll need a wire transfer or cash. The containers can be delivered tomorrow, but I need payment first. There was a long silence. I could practically hear her teeth grinding. I'll arrange the wire transfer this afternoon. Where should the containers be delivered? I'll need an address and someone on site to take delivery. And Patricia, I'll need a signed rental agreement, just to make sure everything's above board. Of course, she said stiffly. After we hung up, I sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. The sweet irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd made my life hell over these containers was now paying me premium rates to use them. Sarah thought it was hilarious when I called to tell her. That's perfect, she said. And it actually helps our case. If the containers are suitable for HOA use during an emergency, it demonstrates they're not the dangerous eyesore Patricia claimed. I drafted a straightforward rental agreement that afternoon, clearly stating the terms, the payment schedule, and the condition in which the containers should be returned. Patricia's wire transfer came through around 3 p.m., all $6,000. The next morning, I arranged for the containers to be delivered to the Pleasant Shores Community Center. The HOA had hired some movers to load everything from their shed into my containers. I showed up to supervise and document everything. Patricia was there, directing the movers with her usual bossy demeanor, but she couldn't quite meet my eyes. Kevin Shaw was helping coordinate, and Margaret Flynn had come by to make sure the community's expensive holiday decorations were properly protected. These are really quite sturdy, Margaret said, examining one of the containers. I don't understand why they were such a problem before. Patricia shot her a look but didn't respond. As the movers loaded the last items, I did a final inspection and had Patricia sign off on the inventory list. Everything was documented, photographed, and secured. They'll be safe here behind the community center, Patricia asked, a hint of worry in her voice. These containers are designed to withstand extreme weather. As long as they're on solid ground and properly secured, which they are, they'll be fine. Your equipment is safer in these than it would be in any standard storage shed. She nodded curtly and walked away without saying thank you. The next 3 days were a blur of preparation. I secured my own house, helped elderly neighbors board up their windows, and made sure my remaining business inventory was properly stored in the containers at Marcus's farm. My wife, my son, and I packed essentials and prepared to evacuate to my sister's house in Atlanta, well inland and out of the storm's path. The highways were packed as people fled the coast. What should have been a 5-hour drive to Atlanta took nearly 9 hours, with traffic crawling along I-10 and I-85. But we made it safely, settled into my sister's spare bedrooms, and hunkered down to watch the news. Hurricane Marcus made landfall near Pensacola on a Thursday evening as a Category 4 storm with sustained winds of 140 miles per hour. The news coverage was terrifying. Storm surge flooded coastal areas, winds ripped roofs off buildings, and power lines snapped like twigs. The footage showed neighborhoods underwater, boats tossed onto highways and debris scattered everywhere. Communication was spotty. Cell towers were down and we couldn't reach most people back home. The waiting was agonizing. My house, my business, everything I'd built was in the path of that monster storm, and there was nothing I could do but watch and hope. 3 days after landfall, the storm had passed, and authorities began allowing residents to return, though they warned that many areas were still without power and some roads were impassable. We loaded up the car and made the drive back, not knowing what we'd find. The closer we got to Pensacola, the worse the damage appeared. Trees down everywhere, buildings with missing roofs, debris scattered across every surface. My stomach churned with anxiety. When we finally reached Pleasant Shores, my heart sank. The neighborhood had taken a serious hit. Several houses had significant roof damage, including the Harrisons' place 2 streets over. Fences were down, trees had fallen onto cars and homes, and standing water remained in the lower-lying areas. But my house, somehow, had fared relatively well. Some shingles were missing, my fence had a section blown out, and my yard looked like a disaster zone, but the structure was intact. Thank God. After checking on my family and making sure everyone was safe, I drove out to Marcus's farm to inspect my containers. The drive took longer than usual due to debris and detours, but when I arrived, I was relieved to see that Marcus's property had weathered the storm well. The containers were exactly where I'd left them, completely undamaged with all my equipment safe and dry inside. Marcus met me at the barn, looking exhausted but unhurt. "Your containers didn't budge an inch," he said. "Those things are built like tanks." That's what I was counting on. Back in Pleasant Shores, I checked on the 3 containers I'd rented to the HOA. The community center had some damage. Part of the roof was gone and windows were blown out, but my containers sat behind it, unmoved and undamaged. I unlocked one to inspect the contents. Everything was perfectly dry and secure. The HOA's equipment had survived without a scratch. Patricia called me that evening. "I need to extend the rental," she said, skipping any greeting. "The community center needs major repairs before we can rebuild the storage shed. We'll need the containers for at least another 2 months. 2 months at the weekly rate would be $12,000. "I know the math, Jason. The HOA board approved it. Can we do monthly billing for the extension?" "Sure. I'll send over a revised agreement. Same terms, monthly payment schedule." "Fine." Over the next few weeks, Pleasant Shores began the long process of recovery. FEMA trailers appeared for families whose homes were too damaged to occupy. Contractors were overwhelmed with work, and prices for repairs skyrocketed due to demand. My business actually thrived in the aftermath. Construction supply companies were in high demand, and my inventory helped contractors get started on repairs while they waited for their regular suppliers to restock. The storage containers proved invaluable, keeping materials dry and secure while work sites were exposed to the elements. I ended up needing additional containers for all the business I was handling, so I ordered 6 more. This time, I had them delivered directly to Marcus's farm, avoiding any potential HOA drama. But the drama found me anyway. 6 weeks after the hurricane, I received a notice from Patricia. The HOA had scheduled a special meeting to discuss permanent policy updates regarding emergency preparedness and community equipment storage. When I arrived at the meeting held in a tent outside the still-damaged community center, I found most of the neighborhood in attendance. The hurricane had brought the community together in some ways, with neighbors helping neighbors clean up and repair. But tensions were high too, with disputes over insurance, contractor availability, and HOA priorities for community repairs. Patricia called the meeting to order. Thank you all for coming. As we continue recovering from Hurricane Marcus, the board has been discussing lessons learned and policy improvements for the future. One thing that became clear is that our previous storage solutions were inadequate. She clicked through a presentation on her laptop, showing photos of the damaged community center and the destroyed storage shed. However, we were fortunate to have access to industrial storage containers that protected our community equipment. These containers, rented from Xavier, proved invaluable. I sat up straighter, curious where this was going. Therefore, the board proposes purchasing 3 permanent storage containers for Pleasant Shores to be positioned behind the community center. We're seeking community input on this proposal. Hands shot up immediately. Margaret Flynn spoke first. If we're buying containers, why not just buy them from Jason? He clearly has connections with suppliers. Patricia's smile was forced. We'll be soliciting multiple bids, of course. This is a significant capital expense. Tom Harrison raised his hand. I've got a question. If the HOA is planning to permanently install storage containers on community property, doesn't that kind of contradict the whole reason you went after Jason's containers in the first place? The room went quiet. Patricia's face flushed. That's completely different. Community property serves the entire neighborhood's interests. Personal commercial equipment is what Jason was using to run a business that benefits the community. Tom interrupted. Half the contractors working on our houses right now are getting supplies from him. His containers helped people recover from the hurricane. Other voices joined in, supporting Tom's point. I sat there, not saying a word, just watching Patricia squirm. Kevin Shaw tried to defend her. The board has to balance individual property rights with community standards that apparently change depending on whether the HOA benefits from them. Someone called out from the back. The meeting devolved into arguments. Some residents supported Patricia's proposal for community containers while acknowledging the hypocrisy. Others demanded that the restrictions on personal storage be lifted. A few just wanted to talk about other post-hurricane priorities, like repairing the community pool and replanting the damaged landscaping. Eventually, Patricia adjourned the meeting without any resolution, promising that the board would take all perspectives under consideration. As people filed out, several neighbors approached me. "You should run for the HOA board," Margaret said. "We need people with common sense making decisions, not power-hungry dictators." I laughed, but she was serious. Elections are in 3 months. Patricia's term as president is up. You'd have my vote. The idea planted itself in my head. I'd never considered joining the HOA board, honestly. I'd always seen it as a thankless job that attracted the wrong kind of people. But maybe that was exactly the problem. If reasonable people didn't step up, then folks like Patricia would keep running things. Over the next few days, more neighbors approached me with the same suggestion. Even Jennifer Kowalski, the pet groomer, said she'd nominate me if I was willing to run. I discussed it with my wife, Amy. "It's a lot of responsibility," she said. "And you already have your business to run." "I know. But if I can help make the HOA more reasonable, it benefits everyone, including us. Plus, you'd love to beat Patricia at her own game," she added with a knowing smile. I couldn't deny that. Before I committed, I wanted to see how the storage container situation played out. Patricia extended the rental agreement twice more, eventually keeping my containers for 4 months total. By my calculation, the HOA paid me $24,000 to rent containers they'd originally banned. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the neighborhood. When Patricia finally returned the containers in December, Everything was in good condition and I'd made a tidy profit. But more importantly, I'd proven my point. The containers weren't eyesores or nuisances. They were practical, useful, and beneficial. Sarah's appeal of the HOA violation finally got a hearing in county court in January. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Sandra Martinez, reviewed all the evidence, the photos of selective enforcement, and the documentation of the HOA renting my containers. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Judge Martinez said, peering over her reading glasses at the HOA's lawyer, Richard Pemberton. The HOA issued a violation for storage containers, threatened fines and liens, forced Mr. Xavier to remove them from his property, and then rented those exact same containers during an emergency. Pemberton shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, the emergency circumstances were unique. Mr. Pemberton, this is one of the clearest cases of HOA overreach and selective enforcement I've seen. Not only is the violation rescinded, but I'm ordering the HOA to reimburse Mr. Xavier for all legal fees associated with fighting this violation." Patricia, sitting beside Pemberton, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. "Furthermore," Judge Martinez continued, "I'm directing the Pleasant Shores HOA to revise their commercial equipment policy within 60 days to provide clear, specific guidelines that will be enforced consistently across all residents. Mr. Xavier is free to return his storage containers to his property, provided they remain behind his fence line and out of public view, which was his original arrangement." The gavel came down, and just like that, I'd won. Outside the courthouse, Sarah shook my hand. That was about as decisive a victory as you could hope for. The judge basically called out the HOA for their nonsense. "Now let's see if they actually follow through with the policy revisions," I said. Patricia stormed past us without a word, but I caught the look she gave me. Pure venom. A week later, the HOA announced the slate of candidates for the upcoming board elections. Patricia was running for re-election as president, along with Kevin Shaw for treasurer. The other positions had various candidates, most of whom I barely knew. Margaret Flynn called me that evening. "Jason, you need to run. I'm serious. If Patricia gets re-elected, she's going to make your life even more miserable. She doesn't take losing well. I've noticed. Several of us are willing to campaign for you. Tom, Jennifer, the Hendersons, the Chens. We could actually make a difference." I thought about my court victory, about the way Patricia had abused her authority, about the potential to make Pleasant Shores a better place to live. Okay, I'll run. But I'm not doing this to get revenge on Patricia. I want to actually fix the problems. That's exactly why you should run. The next 2 months were surprisingly intense. Running for HOA board president turned out to be more political than I expected. Patricia had her supporters mostly people who liked the idea of strict rule enforcement and feared that loosening restrictions would hurt property values. I campaigned on a platform of reasonable rules, consistent enforcement, and transparency. I held small gatherings at my house where neighbors could voice concerns. I created a simple website outlining my positions. I even printed flyers, which felt absurd for an HOA election, but Patricia had gone all in with her own campaign materials, so I matched her effort. The debates were the worst part. We had 2 community forums where candidates could present their positions and answer questions. Patricia used every opportunity to paint me as someone who wanted to eliminate all rules and turn Pleasant Shores into chaos. "If we don't maintain standards, property values will plummet," she argued. "People bought homes here because they wanted a well-maintained, orderly community. Mr. Xavier wants to let everyone do whatever they want." "That's not accurate," I responded calmly. I want clear, reasonable rules that are applied fairly to everyone. The current system gives the board too much subjective authority, which leads to exactly the kind of selective enforcement that landed the HOA in court last month. That landed well with the audience. Patricia's court loss was still fresh in everyone's mind. I also think the board should be more transparent about finances, more responsive to homeowner concerns, and more focused on maintaining community amenities rather than policing minor violations. We should be making Pleasant Shores a great place to live, not a stressful one. Election Day arrived in March, exactly 1 year after my storage container saga had begun. Voting was done by mail and ballot, with results to be announced at a community meeting. The turnout was surprisingly high. Over 70% of homeowners voted, compared to the usual 30%. People were engaged and wanted change. When Margaret Flynn, serving as the election committee chair, stood up to announce the results, I felt my heart pounding. Amy squeezed my hand. For HOA president with 142 votes, Xavier. The room erupted in applause. Patricia had received only 89 votes. I'd won by a significant margin. Patricia sat frozen in her seat, her face pale. Kevin Shaw had lost his treasurer race too. The entire board had flipped, with reform-minded candidates winning almost every position. In the parking lot afterward, Patricia approached me. For a moment, I thought she might congratulate me or at least acknowledge the results gracefully. Instead, she said, "You have no idea what you're getting into. Running this HOA is harder than you think." I'm sure you're right. But I'm willing to learn and willing to listen to all homeowners, not just the ones who agree with me. She walked away without another word. My first act as HOA president was forming a committee to revise the commercial equipment and home business policies, as Judge Martinez had ordered. We brought together homeowners with different perspectives, including one of Patricia's supporters, to draft something fair and clear. The new policy distinguished between equipment that was visible from the street and equipment that was properly stored out of sight. It created a simple permitting process for home businesses, requiring only basic disclosure and neighbor notification. It eliminated the vague, aesthetic concerns language that had given previous boards too much subjective authority. The membership approved the revised policies by an overwhelming margin. I also made good on my transparency promises. We started publishing detailed financial reports, showing exactly where HOA dues were spent. We created an online portal where residents could submit maintenance requests and track their status. We scheduled regular open forum meetings where any homeowner could raise concerns directly with the board. Pleasant Shores started to feel like an actual community rather than a dictatorship. My storage containers, meanwhile, returned to their original spot behind my fence. No one complained. In fact, several neighbors asked if I could rent them container space for their own needs, which became a nice little side income. The hurricane recovery continued throughout that year. The community center was fully repaired by summer, and we rebuilt the storage shed, though we also purchased 2 of those industrial storage containers for permanent community use, which I sourced at a good price from my supplier. Patricia moved away 6 months after the election. Word through the neighborhood grapevine was that she'd taken a job in North Carolina. I couldn't say I was sorry to see her go, but I also didn't celebrate it. She'd been a difficult adversary, but she genuinely believed she was protecting the neighborhood, even if her methods were terrible. One Saturday afternoon in October, as I was organizing inventory in my containers, Tom Harrison stopped by with a 6-pack of beer. "Thought you might need a break," he said, handing me one. We sat on my back porch, looking at the containers that had caused so much trouble. "You know what's funny?" Tom said. "Those things basically saved the neighborhood during the hurricane, and Patricia tried so hard to get rid of them." "She wasn't entirely wrong about wanting to maintain standards," I said. "She just went about it the wrong way." Rules need to make sense and serve the community's actual interests, not just exist for their own sake. "That's some wisdom right there, Mr. President." We clinked bottles and watched the sunset. Life in Pleasant Shores had stabilized into something genuinely pleasant. The HOA board worked efficiently, handling maintenance issues and community events without drama. Property values had actually increased post-hurricane as the neighborhood rebuilt and improved. My business continued to thrive, helping contractors throughout the region with supply needs. The storage containers remained essential to my operations, and the passive rental income from neighbors helped offset my initial investment. A year later, during a routine board meeting, Margaret Flynn proposed something that made me laugh. "I think we should install a small plaque at the community center, commemorating Hurricane Marcus and the recovery efforts. We could mention how the community came together and learned important lessons about preparation, like keeping industrial storage containers on hand." I suggested with a grin. Exactly like that. The board approved the plaque, which was installed that spring. It included a tasteful reference to improved emergency storage solutions that protected community assets during the 2025 hurricane season. Every time I passed it, I thought about Patricia and her Mercedes SUV pulling into my driveway that March morning, setting off a chain of events that ultimately changed the entire neighborhood for the better. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of working things out. The HOA had banned my storage containers, forced me to fight a legal battle, and then desperately needed those same containers when disaster struck. They'd paid me premium rates to rent what they'd tried to eliminate. And in the end, the whole situation led to positive changes that benefited everyone. I served 2 terms as HOA president, eventually stepping down to focus more on my business and family. But the policies we implemented stayed in place, and Pleasant Shores maintained its reputation as a well-run community with reasonable rules and engaged leadership. The storage containers are still behind my fence, still essential to my business, and still completely uncontroversial. Funny how something that once seemed so important to fight about became just another normal part of the neighborhood. Hurricane season still makes me nervous every year. I watch the weather reports, track the storms, and make sure my containers are properly secured. But I'm also grateful for Hurricane Marcus in a strange way. It exposed the flaws in how we were operating as a community and created the opportunity for real improvement. Sometimes it takes a storm, literal or figurative, to reveal what really matters and what's just noise. In Pleasant Shores, we learned that lesson the hard way, but we learned it well. And those 6 storage containers that started all the trouble, they're still here, still useful, and still a reminder that practical solutions matter more than arbitrary rules. The best part is knowing that future residents won't have to deal with the kind of arbitrary enforcement that I faced. The rules are clear, the board is accountable, and the community actually functions as a community. That's worth more than any amount of rental income or legal victories. As I write this, it's been 3 years since Patricia pulled into my driveway to inform me about that first violation. 3 years since I thought my biggest problem was where to store some metal containers. Looking back, I can see how every confrontation, every setback, and every small victory contributed to something larger. My advice to anyone facing HOA disputes: document everything, know your rights, hire a good lawyer if needed, and don't be afraid to stand up for what's reasonable. HOAs exist to serve the community, not the other way around. When they forget that, it's up to homeowners to remind them. And if you ever need to store equipment during a hurricane, I know a guy with some excellent containers. Just don't tell the HOA, "Oh wait, I am the HOA. Never mind." Pleasant Shores is a better place now, and I'm proud to have played a part in making it that way. The storage containers sit behind my fence, weathered but sturdy, a testament to the idea that sometimes the most practical solution is also the simplest one. No matter how much someone might want to complicate it with rules and regulations and power trips, common sense usually wins out in the end. It just might take a hurricane to prove it.